This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
You are listening to the Friday morning break on Teachers Talk Radio with John Gibbs. My guest this week is Dennis Sherwood, writer, consultant, systems analyst, and campaigner for Reliable Examinations. We are discussing today the appeals process, which may not be what you think it is.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
And it's Friday the 6th of September, so if you're in school today, or you're looking forward to Monday, if I can put it that way, or you've been in school all week teaching or preparing, welcome back to the new school year. And some of you, and indeed it was the case with me in my school career, some of you will be looking at the exam results. Well, let's face it, a lot of you will be looking at exam results. Some will be putting together PowerPoints. You'll be looking at those subjects that did well and those that did badly. You'll be analysing the cohorts and so on. Others will be congratulating yourself on the results. And a few of you will be involved in considering the appeals process. It will have been ongoing for some of you since results day, and many of you would still be thinking about which students you should appeal on behalf of. And those and you will no doubt be thinking that an appeal is necessary. There will be those students you thought did all year much better and they came out of the exam high-fiving their friends and something's gone wrong. So you're going to put an appeal in. What is an appeal? What do you think it is? What do they think it is? We're going down the rabbit hole with my guest, Dennis Sherwood, who knows more about this than most of us. I have to say that, Dennis. I examined 10 years. I've learned a lot when I talk to you. So Dennis Sherwood, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, John. A pleasure to be with you once more. We were together a couple of years ago. And like you say, the subject of, what do you do if you're concerned about a grade is really topical right now.
It is. It's going to be on the forefront of a lot of students' minds, parents' minds, and teachers. In a legal system, if you have a trial and there's an appeal, I guess you think what it means is that things under heaven are never infallible, so that there will occasionally be mistakes. And with exams under heaven, there will be mistakes. Something got added up wrong, or the marker was ill or something. So I think that an appeal was a remark. Well, let's start with, what is the role of appeals? Why are appeals important to us and in an exam system? What do they do?
Yeah, well, let's sort of wind the clock back a few weeks and think about, A-level results day and GCSE results day. Joe opens the envelope, reads the email, whatever, and sees A star for further maths and leaps for joy. But, over there, Sam is looking a bit distraught. B for A-level geography, and, Sam really wanted that A and is concerned about a university place. And the following week, Alex sees grade 3 for GCSE English and faces the resit and being branded a failure and all of that stuff. Now, the big question is, how do those students know that nothing has gone wrong and that A star, that B, and that grade 3 are the grades they truly merited on the basis of the exam they actually did? Now, actually, they don't. There is no standard of comparison which they can make. Okay, they may have done mock exams way back when, but they don't count. And at A-level, there are UCAS predictions, but they don't count either. You've only got that A star, that B, or that 3. You do not know if something has gone wrong. Yes. And if you're concerned, what can you do?
Yes, and as a teacher, I would stand outside the exam room, or I'd watch them coming out of the exam room, and I'd try to look at their body language, and I'd say to them, well, how well did it? Because it's a mystery, isn't it? What happened in that room goes off to be marked by other people. You've taught these students for 2 years, 3 years, maybe you've known them their whole secondary career. And you're not in control of what they did and what happened to that paper and where it went. So there's a curious sense in which, well, now we wait to see what happens.
When you get that A star, that B, or that 3, you have to take it on trust that everything has worked. But if you are concerned, what do you actually want? Well, I'm just, let me say, a former parent, and my kids have grown up. I've not been a teacher, but I was in that position way back when. And what I actually wanted on behalf of my kid was a fair remark by someone independent and authoritative, someone who would act, if you like, as a Supreme Court judge, for want of a better analogy, who could give that expert second opinion. That's what I wanted. And of course, there's that word appeal. So I'd seek an appeal to get that second opinion. And I wonder, actually, if what I was thinking all those years ago for my kids is still in the minds of students, parents and teachers, that actually what we want is that second opinion, that remark. Because as we'll see, that actually doesn't happen. But is that what people want?
Absolutely. I imagine that if I marked something and I wasn't sure of the grade, I'd pass it to another teacher. Could you mark this for me? Just let me know. They were more experienced than me, whatever. And you come back and you go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I was a bit harsh. That's what you imagine a remark. I mean, an appeal is another mark.
Okay, well, the sad truth, and it is a truth, and it's not actually well publicised, is that you do not get a remark except under very special conditions. And you certainly do not get a remark by right. And I think that alone would be a surprise, particularly to students and parents who are feeling distraught at this kind of time. Teachers have been around this a bit longer, so they probably know. But what student or parent does not know that actually you don't get a remark by right? It's only under very special conditions that we will discuss.
Yeah.
And this is a real minefield, because it is full of distractions of language. It's full of all sorts of misleading statements. And, I am very concerned about this, because I don't think the appeals process is delivering fairness to the student population. And, it'd be good to explore some of those during our chat this morning.
Could it even be worse than that? I mean, in the sense that if there is an appeals process, the appeals process is a means of validating the whole process. So you say to themselves, we are so confident that we're going to allow you, if you think there's anything wrong at all, to have an appeal. Well, that sort of says that emphasizes the confidence we have. Teachers I will have done this to students. I would have said, well, don't worry, we'll appeal this, and that will reassure them that something even more objective than happened before will take place.
And absolutely, the appeals process underpins the integrity of the whole thing.
Yes.
And it is vital. Let me just give you some information which I find really quite intriguing. Let's suppose that I'm a parent, my kid's in tears, very concerned, and I'm thinking, well, should I go to the school and say, let's see if we can appeal? One of the things I might do is say, well, let me find out a bit about the appeals process. So I Google how many grades are changed as a result of an appeal. And indeed, I invite anyone listening to this to go to your laptop or whatever and just do that. Because when you Google that or search that on another engine, you'll come across a website. It'll probably be at the top of the list, which is Ofqual's official statistics. And you'll see a box. I'm reading that box now. It says that for the summer 2023 exams in England, we're only talking about England, and we're only talking about GCSE, AS and A-level. This is the data set that is available. So beyond England, BTECs and so on, not really part of this discussion. So anyway, I'm looking at this website, key headlines, and I read this. The number of grades changed for GCSE, AS and A-level as a result of an appeal is 710. It then goes on to say that there were 6.3 million grades awarded, so the number of grades changed on appeal is around 0.01%. That's what it says on the website. I, as a parent, what am I going to think when I read that out of 6 million grades awarded, 710 are changed on appeal?
Yes.
What's going to go through my mind?
It suggests immediately that this is an incredibly accurate and reliable process. That's all that.
And I
That's,
think
that's what that
it
means
all-
to me.
Yeah, and I think it also means to me that, if I were to appeal on behalf of my kid and put them through that anxiety,
Yes.
the likelihood that it will deliver an outcome that I want is pretty low. So it's a huge disincentive. So that's on the official website of Ofqual 710, grades change, GCSE, AS, A-level as a result of an appeal in 2023.
Yes. And it's like I
Now-
can see that you're setting us up for this isn't quite what it seems.
This, to my mind, is hugely, hugely misleading. But it happens to be true. So no one is saying anything false, but there's a lot going on in that single statement which needs unravelling. And the first thing is that word appeal. We have used the word appeal since we started, and it's what any normal person is going to think they should do if they're concerned about a grade. But it turns out in the land of Ofqual, the regulator, an appeal is something very, very special indeed. And that's not what you do if you're concerned about a grade. So an appeal, the word itself, is hugely, hugely restricted and isn't what you would do as a parent or a student.
So
What you actually do is you challenge.
what's the difference? And what happens when you challenge the result?
Okay, let me go for that briefly and we'll dig in.
Yes.
If a student or a parent is concerned that something has gone wrong, the first thing they have to do is to talk to the school, because only the school can take any action.
Yeah.
You, as a parent or a student, individually can't do anything. You have to go through the school. So you need the school's help. And schools have a vital role in actually helping make this happen rather than getting in the way. And sometimes I do hear stories about schools that are a bit obstructive, I'm afraid. So what the school does is the school then contacts the exam board. That is the outfit that organised the exam. In England, it's OCR, AQA, or Pearson Edexcel, the brand name of the exams that were sat. And what they do is they raise a challenge. It's not an appeal, it's a challenge.
Yes. Okay.
And what a challenge does is it triggers a whole set of processes. We'll go into that in a minute. But that process rolls on and rolls on and rolls on and rolls on and has an outcome. And that outcome might be confirming the original grade or changing a grade or whatever. If you are still, as the parent or student, unhappy with the outcome of that big process, you then appeal to the exam board to say, oh, exam board, review what you have just done yourself, so they are self-policing, and take another look. And if you are unhappy with that, you can then escalate that further to Ofqual, who look over the exam board's shoulders. So what Ofqual call an appeal is right at the end of the I am unhappy process and counts only those very few people who've got the tenacity to go beyond that first stage of the challenge to take it to an appeal.
Yes.
So it is true that only 710 grades actually got changed right at the end of the process. But if you go back, you will find that the number of challenges is much, much bigger. In fact, in 2023, the number of challenges was about 250,000 for GCSE and another 40,000-50,000 or so for A-level. So the number of challenges is much higher.
Yes, I should say this. The 710 are those who changed after an appeal on the appeal of the appeal. It's a filter. It filters it down.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
You are listening to the Friday morning break on Teachers Talk Radio with John Gibbs. My guest this week is Dennis Sherwood, writer, consultant, systems analyst and campaigner for Reliable Examinations. We are discussing today the appeals process, which may not be what you think it is.
So what we really need to know is how effective the challenge is. What happens then?
So let me unravel what happens at challenges and talk about some of the numbers. If you're unhappy with the grade, with the support of the school, you challenge. And the challenge takes basically a number of forms. The first thing you can do is seek what is called a clerical check. No. And that pretty well does what it says on the tin. What it does is it checks, for example, that all of the questions got marked, that all of those marks got faithfully recorded in the total, and that the total adds up correctly. So there's no clerical error in the process.
Yes, I remember when I was doing examining, before we started, as I say, I was an examiner for about 10 years with A-level politics, and they would, and occasionally, you'd add the numbers up. So you got 5, and you've marked the essays, you add them up, and you're a bit tired, you add it up wrong. And I remember the chief examiner coming back to me and said, "John, be careful. We spotted a couple of additions that weren't correct." Sorry, double add, John. So the clerical check is, did they add it up correctly?
Yeah, and that's important. Obviously, as you say, the exam boards are concerned about that. They have their own quality control processes, but there's 6 million scripts out there. It is possible for something to go wrong, even with the computer systems. So a clerical recheck just ticks that box. The second thing you can ask for is what is called a review of marking. And if you go on the websites of any of the exam boards, AQA, OCR, and Edexcel, they say very, very similar things, that a review of marking checks for marking errors. That's what it says, which is true.
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah. I think if I was the parent expecting my script to be remarked, and I read a review of marking, checking for marking errors, I think quite reasonably, I would infer from that, well, of course, a senior examiner marks it again, and if there's a difference, that's an error because the senior examiner is authoritative, and that's exactly what I want. But that's not what happens. I'm afraid that is not what happens, and this is central to what's going on, but also, to my mind, the deliberate obscurity of the information available. Yes. Because it is not a remark by right, and none of the websites of any of the exam boards say that explicitly, nor, for example, does the BBC website or TES or any of the others. It just says a check of marking. And of course, everyone will leap to the conclusion that they're the same, but they are fundamentally different.
If someone handed me an essay and said, "Can you check this?" I'm going to remark it. It's going to be
Yeah.
remarked. So, Dennis, we're getting to the Orwellian newspeak here. A
Yeah, we are.
marking error test, a marking error check.
Yeah.
What's that mean?
What does that mean? Now, I need to go back to what happens when the marking is originally done. And John, I know you've been an examiner too. I've not been an examiner. So, let's make this, a double act, because, you can tell me what really happens. I'm just using, my, arm's length knowledge. Okay. So let's take, Alex and her GCS English. She's writing an essay on whatever it might be. That essay goes to an examiner who is fully qualified and trained and is given a mark. And just arbitrarily, let's just suppose that the mark given by that particular examiner is, say, 8 out of 12 or whatever it might be. Now, we all know that when you mark an essay, different individuals, each of whom is totally fully qualified, might give that same essay a slightly different mark. So, John, if you were to mark 8 out of 12, someone else might have marked 7, someone else might have.
That was one of the most surprising things. But in a sense, I knew it must be true, what you've just said. But when I went for my first ever examiners meeting, we sat in a nice room down in London somewhere, and we sat around the table and they said, "Right, here's a trial script. We've marked this for last year. We're going to just get to." And we all marked it, and some gave it top grade, and some gave it a middle grade, and some gave it. But well, we are really, and there was a teacher there who absolutely insisted it was a terrible essay, and what we were involved in doing, in a sense, was not agreeing with each other, but agreeing that we would mark the way the chief examiner marked. So we had to say, well, no, this is what we are looking for. Here's the mark scheme. We must try to coordinate our marking. We know you're rather strict, John. We know you're rather generous. You've got to be less generous. You've got to be less strict. And that's what we did.
Absolutely. But despite all of that, there's still the possibility that on the day, one examiner would give 8, one might give 9, one might give 7. 3 or 12 are real outliers, but 7, 8 or 9 are okay. Now, the exam boards and Ofqual, the regulator, know this. So in order to bring some degree of commonality of standard, some consistency, they do a number of things. And you've already mentioned one, John. They get the examiners together and they train them and they have these conversations so that there is some sense of what good looks like. That's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is, as everyone listening to this will know, there's a thing called a mark scheme, which is a sort of checklist for all of the questions on the exam paper of what attracts marks, so that you can get a kind of commonality of standards across different examiners. So there's the mark scheme, which is central to this, so that you comply with the mark scheme. The third thing that happens is that the subject senior examiners look over the shoulder, metaphorically, of the regular examiners while they're doing the work. So you might be marking a particular script and giving it whatever, and the senior examiner in your subject, I think it was politics when you were doing it, would look over your shoulder and say, well, actually, John, you've just given that, 8 marks. I would have given it 9, in fact, but, 8 is close enough to 9 that's fine. But if you'd have given it 3, the senior examiner would have contacted you and say, actually, something's going wrong with the marking, you need to fix it.
Yes, and
Now,
I remember being given the mark scheme, and the first thing they would say to you is this is a description, a kind of almost a theoretical description of the sort of thing we're looking for. But remember, you may come across answers that are good, but don't contain things in the mark scheme. So, right, so you were given a degree of discretion.
Yeah.
And then when I would mark my first 100 marks, they say, right, mark your first 50 papers or 100, and then we're going to check those. And then if we think you're within, as you say, the margin, then off you go and mark the rest, and we'll sample a few from the next several hundred.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. But the margin of which you talk there, John, the official word is tolerance.
Yes.
So there's a tolerance associated with every question, and that tolerance is the maximum drift, the maximum difference between what an ordinary examiner might give and what the senior examiner might give. And that tolerance varies depending on the subject of the question and so on, but it allows for some degree, limited degree, of flexibility in the exercise of academic judgment. And it's built in right at the start and is built into the quality control process. So let's imagine I'm back to Alex and her GCSE English paper. The examiner that marks the script gives Alex 8. The senior examiner, looking over the examiner's shoulder, would have given 9, but 1 mark is within tolerance, so that's fine. Now all the marks for each of the individual questions are added up for the total mark for Alex's paper. And let's suppose that the total mark for an English script is typically 160 marks. That's a representative number. And let's suppose that the mark she actually got ends up at, say, 74. Now, there's a hypothetical exercise in parallel with that, which is adding up the marks that would have been given if the senior examiner had done all the marking. Now, that didn't actually happen for real, but it's there, because the senior examiner would have given that first question 9 rather than the 8. So Alex ends up with 74, but supposing that the senior examiner stream would have given her 76. Those are 2 equivalent marks. They are both legitimate. Everything complies with the mark scheme. There are no errors at all. It's just the normal difference in academic opinion, as you see in all expert opinions, as we saw in the last few weeks at the Olympics, when they're judging things like gymnastics. Different experts have slightly different views. Now, the important thing about the 74 and the 76 is nothing's gone wrong. Everything is within the mark scheme and everything is within tolerance. And that happens relatively early in the process. Towards the end of the process, the grade boundaries are determined once all the marking has been done. So let me give you 2 cases. Let me give you the case where the grade boundaries for grade 3 in English are all marks from, say, 71 to 79 inclusive. Totally plausible, totally within range.
Yeah.
In that case, the 74 and the 76 end up with grade 3. And it really doesn't matter whether or not the senior examiner did the marking. But let's take another case. Let us suppose that grade 3 is all marks up to and including 75, but grade 4, the pass, is all marks from 76 upwards. Alex marked 74 ends up with grade 3 fail, but had a senior examiner marked the script, she would have got 76 grade 4 pass. Because the grade boundary is in the middle of that allowed range, it makes all the difference in the world. But of course, Alex doesn't know that. She just sees grade 3. So she goes to the school and she says, I'm a bit concerned about that. I'd like to appeal. And the school says, well, actually, you're not appealing, you're challenging. We go through all of that. And we'll invite a review of marking. When the review of marking is done, it does 2 things. It checks for compliance with the mark scheme. And guess what? 74 complies with the mark scheme. It checks for a marking error, which is some kind of Lulu mark way out of it. That's not there either. So they confirm grade 3 fail, even though a senior examiner would have given grade 4 pass.
Yes.
That's what happens. So that review of marking, checking for marking errors, ignores the possibility that a senior examiner could have given a legitimate mark higher than you actually got and at a higher grade.
So what we're saying to the student is your mark was accurately unreliable.
Bizarrely, absolutely right. And that is totally consistent with all the other misinformation and misleading language that is around this patch, from challenges to appeal.
On another day with another examiner, you'd have got a different grade. But that's not the way the cards fell for you.
And in particular, a senior examiner who, according to Ofqual, is that arbiter of right and wrong in the control process, whom Ofqual themselves represent as giving the definitive or true mark and grade. Even if a senior examiner were to have given the definitive true grade of 4, the grade 3 is confirmed as a result of the review of marking. And this, of course, has only been happening since 2016. Anyone that went through the process from 2015 earlier would have got the remark, which is most of the parents around here. That's what they experience.
This is an important moment, isn't it? Because something changed in 2016. My memory of marking as an examiner was before 2016, but I was still teaching in 2016. And I can remember, making assumptions about the I don't really remember. In some senses, I'm trying to rack my brain. I don't remember a great change, but something big did happen in 2016. So Dennis, what is the change that occurred then?
But before we hear about the changes that took place in 2016, let's take a short break for the Teachers Talk Radio news and another word from the Teachers Talk Radio sponsors. See you back shortly as we're listening to Dennis Sherwood and we're discussing the appeals process in exams, which aren't what you think they are.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Get set for the year ahead with the Bloomsbury Education Back to School sale. Save 30% on all Bloomsbury education books until 30th September. From the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design, we've got something for everyone. Visit bloomsbury.com/B2S sale to shop now and save 30%. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
How can you show your students the opportunities that await them? How can you fuel their aspirations and motivate them to achieve? Futurum Careers provides a wealth of stimulating resources aimed at encouraging 14 to 19-year-olds to pursue careers in STEM and SHAPE. We help you to show your students what they can aim for and how. From articles to activity sheets, animations to podcasts, all our resources align with Gatsby benchmarks and are free for you and your students to download. Visit futurumcareers.com and subscribe today. Futurum Careers, helping teachers to inspire the next generation.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
BBC News reports on the uncertainty over the future of vocational courses, with over 450 schools and colleges in England saying they are unsure which courses they can offer in 2025. The government is conducting a review of post-16 education, and the Department for Education says this will support BTEC students. But the results of the review will not be out until December. This means schools and colleges are unsure which courses they can offer students in September 2025, despite having open days scheduled in the coming weeks. 450 schools have written to the government saying that the uncertainty is making it extremely difficult to plan for the future. Not only can they not tell prospective students which courses will be on offer, they can't tell staff either. More than 200 vocational qualifications, including BTECs and other post-16 courses, were due to be scrapped under the previous government, but days before the first funding changes were due, Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said there would be a pause and review. The 455 schools and colleges in England have joined the Protect Student Choice campaign, a coalition of 25 education organisations and unions. The review comes against a backdrop of issues that have plagued the rollout of T-levels, introduced 3 years ago. Ms Phillipson confirmed T-levels will continue, despite high dropout rates and issues with exam boards. Schools Week highlights the names of the 12-strong panel appointed by government to review the curriculum and assessment. It follows the appointment in July of Professor Becky Francis, the Chief Executive of the Education Endowment Foundation, to lead the review. The panel includes Academy Trust Chief Executives Cassie Buchanan and Dr. Vanessa Ogden, SEND consultant Gary Orban, and exams expert Professor Joanne Baird. It also includes Reach Foundation Curriculum Director John Hutchinson and Funmilola Stewart, who leads on equality, diversity and inclusion across the Dixons Trust. Professor Francis said, "We have ensured that primary, secondary and post-16 sectors are represented," and added that alongside its call for evidence due to launch in September, the review would engage and consult with crucial stakeholder groups and work closely with education staff on the ground. Full details of the panel can be found in the article on the Schools Week website. Hundreds of students are set to miss out on Freshers Week because their accommodation will not be ready. This is according to BBC Bristol, which says Bristol University brought forward Freshers Week so students living in the new Bedminster Metalworks block will struggle to attend events as the residence will not open until the 14th of September. The university says the 819 students affected will be compensated and has offered £250 and promised extra events. But student union officers say the news leaves a sour taste. Legally binding contracts for the new accommodation mean that moving in date cannot be changed. The university brought the Freshers' Week date forward after a review of its academic year. In Wales, record numbers of pupils are being educated out of mainstream schools according to new figures. The figure of 2,279 is more than twice what it was in 2009 to 10 and 28% higher than before the pandemic. The Welsh Government said since the pandemic there had been an increasing demand for provision other than at school, including for physical health and mental health, as well as issues such as anxiety. The figures released do not include those educated outside of school due to parent choice. This has also been rising. Full details of this story can be found on BBC Wales. Finally, The Guardian reports that cleaners at a prestigious UK girls' school have won a dispute over pay and conditions. A strike that was due to take place next week has also been called off. The group of cleaners belonging to the United Voices of the World, a grassroots trade union for low-paid migrant workers, voted to strike after the school's contractor wanted to reduce their working time from 43 to 38 weeks a year, but offered only a £1.55 hourly pay rise in return. After the vote and appeals from teachers and former students, the contractor offered more pay, annual increases, and to meet the London living wage from next year. Whilst the James Allen's Girls' School, known as JAGS, declined to comment, it is understood that former pupils distributed leaflets about the strike and called on the school's leaders to set a good example to its pupils. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
You are listening to the Friday morning break on Teachers Talk Radio with John Gibbs. My guest this week is Dennis Sherwood, writer, consultant, systems analyst and campaigner for Reliable Examinations. We are discussing today the appeals process, which may not be what you think it is.
Yeah, well, actually, in December 2015, in fact, Ofqual went out to consultation to change the rules for appeals. So they issued a consultation document, and, during the winter months of 2016, there was a lot of argy-bargy about that. There's quite a lot in the press about teacher anxiety, because they introduced this reasonable test, the marking error test, that rather having a remark by a senior examiner, you would only get a remark if the original mark is unreasonable.
Do we know why they did this? Why was it?
Why? I've got my suspicions, which I'll come to a moment if I may, because something happened before this, which is merely a timing coincidence, I am sure. But it sure is a coincidence. But since 2016, the remark has been allowed only if there is a marking error, And this has the effect of denying any appeal based on legitimate differences of academic opinion, in particular where the senior examiner might have given a higher mark or grade. And I think that does a huge amount of damage. And I would be very interested to know how many people actually recognise all of this subtlety, the difference between a challenge and an appeal, what a review of marking actually is and isn't. Because if you go on the websites of the exam boards, you don't find any of this stuff. If you go to the JCQ website, Joint Council for Qualifications, there's a bit more information. It actually says this is not a remark, but doesn't explain the significance. Right. But what parent would go to the JCQ website once they've read their exam board's website? And what the teachers advise students and parents, what are you advising them now when they are going through all these anxieties? Because, if you challenge real world appeal a grade, you don't get what you really are after, which is a fair remark by someone whose opinion is authoritative, a senior examiner. It's not what happens by right.
No, so that of course is what people think is happening. So I used to think was happening. Your script will be remarked by someone who's even better at marking, who's even more authoritative. That's what I used to tell students. That was what's going to happen. So why 2016? What was the problem that the 2016 consultation was set out to solve?
Okay, there's quite a lot of stuff on the Ofqual website. And in particular, there's a blog. It's dated, I think, something like 29th of May or 26th of May or something, 2016, where it talks about fairness being at the heart. Okay. And what they say in this website is that it is unfair for a candidate to have a second bite of the cherry when the first bite was appropriate. They actually use second bite of the cherry as a metaphor. And that's what they explain. But, I'm very uncomfortable with that because you read that and say, yeah, it is unfair for people to have a second bite of the cherry, especially if it's the rich kids who can afford to appeal and all that. So you're nodding in agreement. But there's a really deep, misleading nature of that because it kind of implies that all of those marks are totally equivalent in all respects. But there's a huge difference between the legitimate mark 74 and the legitimate mark 76. One's grade 3, one's grade 4, one's definitive, one isn't. So having that second bite of the cherry is vital because the first bite was poisoned and the second bite has got the antidote. But Ofqual portray this as fairness. And I don't think it's fair at all. So I do refer you to the Ofqual blog, May, whatever it is, of 2016, Fairness at the Heart of the Appeal System, and read it with critical thinking in mind.
Indeed. I can imagine a hypothetical case where a school with lots of resources says, we're going to appeal all the kids. We just take all our results and we appeal them. We want them remarked again or we appeal every student. We have the slightest boundary, they're just below the C, just below the 4, just below the A. We'll put them all in for an appeal en masse. We can afford to do that because there's a cost to schools, of course. And the exam board saying, well, that's unfair because you can afford to do this. It's not fair for schools that can't afford to do this or don't have the resources to do it. But the implication is that if there's a possibility that the appeal might result in a change, then we're sort of acknowledging that the first result for everybody is somewhat subjective.
Yeah.
Or we'd say, the exam board would come back to it and say, well, no point in appealing because we know our grades are absolutely reliable. So there's a sort of acknowledgement here that they're unreliable.
Yeah. There's a few things going on there. You're right about the fee. Right now, I was just looking. It's sort of 40, 50, 60 pounds to have a review of marking. It's different if you have what they call a priority review, which is done super fast, it's particularly for university entrance. But it's about that. That fee is refunded if the grade is changed. Mm-hmm. But actually, that is a barrier for state schools, without a doubt. Now, the revolutionary approach to that is to say appeals should be free. Why should anyone be denied access to judgment for a fee? And the exam system should be reliable enough so that everyone's grade is legitimately confirmed, and people soon learn that, so they don't even bother to appeal because they trust the system. So the fee, if the fee was zero, in principle, what is wrong with everyone appealing and people learning that it works? But does it work? Well, here's the thing. We talked about challenges, and I mentioned that there were about, just checking the number, it's about 300,000 grades were challenged for GCSEs and A-level in 2023. If you go into the Pearson Edexcel website, or if you Google how accurate are grades for Pearson, you'll find at least 3 web pages which say 99% or 99.2% or 99.3% of our grades are accurate on results day. And they also claim that that is higher than their competitors, OCR, AQA. I checked the website this morning, they're there, although those numbers refer specifically to 2017, but they're still there. So Ofqual are claiming 99.2% or whatever grade accuracy. Now, it turns out that that is false. The way they get there is they look at the number of grades that were changed on a challenge. And it is true that take GCSE, 5 million grades-ish, about 250,000 challenges, and about 50,000 grades are changed. 50,000 is 1% of 5 million, so about 1% of grades are changed as the result of a challenge. That's the right thing, not an appeal. Which Pearson then say, therefore, 99% of our grades are correct. Pearson are not the only people to say this. Nick Gibb, the schools minister, is on record as saying it, and Joe Saxton and many others. But it is false, and it is false for a very simple reason. The only way a grade can be changed is by virtue of it having been challenged first. So if I go back to those numbers, 5 million GCSE grades, 250,000 challenges, 50,000 changes, the 50,000 changes can refer only to the 250,000 challenges, which is actually about 1 in 5.
So what we really need to know is the percentage of those that were. What is the percentage of those that were changed after an appeal? Is that where I'm going?
Well, you need to know what is happening in the unappealed population.
Right.
Because if we've got 5 million grades and appeal of 250,000 of them, there are 4,750,000 unappealed grades. Because you haven't appealed them, you have no idea whether any of them are right or wrong, whether they would have been changed had an appeal been made. They might all be wrong in the sense that if all of the other 4.75 million had been appealed, they might all have been changed. Statistically unlikely, but you don't know. No. So the only thing you can say is that about 1 in 5 challenges results in a grade change. You can make no statement whatsoever about the unappealed population. And the unappealed population is very big. And of course, we've seen this before. We all laughed way back in 2020 when then President Trump said we should stop testing for COVID, and that would mean it has gone away, because if we don't test for it, we don't find it. It's the same thing. If you don't challenge the grade, you have no idea whether it's right or wrong. So that statement by Pearson Edexcel, it's on their website now, 99% of grades are accurate, is totally false. It shows huge innumeracy, and for an outfit that sits in judgment of students' numeracy, that's pretty damn bad.
What the exam board say, if they could, that, well, the thing about that is those that go in for an appeal, for a check, have been through a filter. They've been through the filter of the teachers. So I remember my own experience. You'd say a student would get a grade that was rather disappointing to them, but it wasn't disappointing to you in a sense. You thought, well, yeah, they were consistent with what I saw from you all year. You know, you're unhappy you didn't get a 4, but you're unhappy you didn't get an A. But you never did an A for me in class. So the appeals the schools will put in will be the ones where there's some concern.
Okay, I accept that, and the fee is a barrier, and everything is underpinned by this huge amount of trust. But, if you take the difference between a grade 5 and a grade 6 in the GCSE subject, a teacher's that wise. Obviously, things like the 3-4 boundary in English and maths is pretty important. And for A-level, there's all sorts of importance as well. But the big question is, okay, I know that on my sample of appeal grades, about 1 in 5 is changed on an appeal. What do I know about that unappealed population? And that was a question that Ofqual actually asked way back when, in about 2014. And 2014 is an interesting date because it's before 2016 when they changed the rules for appeals. So can I just go back in history a bit?
Yes, please do.
Because if you go back to the web, all of this is in the public domain. There's information that Ofqual published on the web in 2014 said they were concerned about what they called the consistency of marking. And the consistency of marking takes us back to exactly where we were in your story about when you were an examiner. How consistent is the thinking and the marking of an ordinary examiner with the senior examiner? They too understood the statistics of challenges, grade changes and appeals. And at that time, early 2010s, it was, let us say, 1% of total entries were changed, about 20% of the challenges. Now, Dame Glenys Stacey did a big research project over, must have been, at least 18 months to look into this, and took 14 subjects, maths, physics, English, history, geography, etc., and remarked the entire cohort as if the entire cohort had been appealed. So you had 250,000 GCSE geography scripts, all of which had been marked and graded. All of those 250,000 were in essence remarked by a subject senior examiner as if they had all been appealed, not just the ones where the rich kids could afford it or the teacher was concerned. Right. So 250,000 GCSE scripts were double marked. So each script had 2 marks and therefore the corresponding grades, one from the senior examiner and one from the ordinary examiner. So for each script, authors, they could say, well, are those 2 grades the same or are they different? And over a period of years between 2016 and 2018, Ofqual published results. And those results are in the public domain. They're in 2 documents. One is called Marking Consistency Metrics, which is a partial report dated November 2016. The other one is called Marking Consistency Metrics and Update, dated November 2018. And the key results are in that second report of November 2018 in figure number 12. And that shows that if you take maths, for example, about 96 scripts in every 100 end up with the same grade no matter who did the marking. But even in maths, 4 scripts in every 100 end up with a grade different from the senior examiner's definitive grade. So by that measure, maths itself is about 96% reliable.
Which you'd imagine with maths, I guess, would it be?
But even 4% adrift is, maths with 700,000 GCSE candidates.
That's a surprise, yeah.
As you walk down the subjects, if you take geography, for example, the number is 65% end up with the same grade and 35% end up with different grades. And that says that about 1 in 3 geography, GCSE, AS and A-level results as declared on results day is different from the grade that would have been given had a senior examiner marked the script. 1 in 3. No matter how good the student, no matter how good the teacher, 1 in 3 is going to end up with a grade which is non-definitive. If you come down a bit further to history, the numbers are about 56 right, 44 wrong, non-definitive, nearly half. So about half of the history. Now, this is looking at the entire cohort of scripts and comparing the marks from the senior examiner with an ordinary examiner, all within tolerance, all compliant with the mark scheme. It's what I call fuzziness. And if that fuzziness straddles a grade boundary, we hit the problem we've been talking about.
So they examining effectively, Ofqual examined themselves. They examined the exam system. They said, "What? Let's find out. Let's find out how reliable our grades are." And they found out they're not.
Yeah.
But in a sense, they said, "Well, they are, because we're going to say this is acceptable in some way."
Well, I don't know what actually happened next, because I wasn't around the table. But in the public domain, there is a board paper dated the 18th of November 2015, which was presented on that day to the Ofqual board, which contains a paragraph which says, words to the effect of, "The report of our study of marking consistency is now complete." So I read that as saying that the findings of that research were on the table in Ofqual on the 18th of November 2015. Findings that show that 4% of maths grades are non-definitive, 35% of geography, nearly half of history. And if you look at the average across all the subjects, they did 14 subjects. They didn't do French. They didn't do Spanish. They didn't do art and design. Interesting. But of the 14 subjects they did do, it's about 75 right, 25 wrong. 75 definitive, 25 non-definitive. 1 grade in 4 on average is wrong in that sense. So that was on the table in November 2015, 18th of November. On the 10th of December 2015, 3 weeks later, Ofqual go out consultation to change the rules for appeals, to introduce the marking error test, the reasonableness test, which rules that out for discovery on appeal. And they put that through in May of 2016.
So Dennis, what you're saying here, in essence, is they found themselves to be wanting. Since they found there was a problem, and instead of confronting it, in a sense, they either shrug the shoulders and go, "Well, this is what it is," and then they devised a system that makes it harder to see that thing.
Okay, I don't know the motivations. I wasn't around the table.
Right.
But anyone can look up that board paper of the 18th of November 2015. Anyone can look up the consultation of the 10th of December 2015 and the May implementation of that and the consequences of that. Those are in the public domain. It wasn't until November of 2016, much later than the change in the rules, that Ofqual published their first partial report. And it wasn't until 3 years later, in November 2018, that the numbers that I have just mentioned, the 96, 4, 35, 65 for geography, were actually published. Right. So they were sitting on those results for a long time.
Time we spoke, Dennis, to some extent, there was a moment in one of the select committees in the House of Commons where this was sort of acknowledged that there one grade either way. I think the phrase was accepted.
Yeah. John, thank you for remembering that. Ofqual have made a number of very intriguing statements. And John, you correctly remember that the question was asked of Glynis Stacey, now Dame Glynis Stacey, the same lady that commissioned that research way back in 2014 at the Select Committee in September 2020. She was asked very directly, are 25% of grades unreliable? That was the essence of the question. She didn't actually answer that question directly. She didn't push back on it. She said, well, actually, we all know, don't we? She didn't actually say that. She said, grades are reliable to 1 grade either way. Now, that's not the same statement as 25% of grades are wrong, but it can be shown, mathematically I've done that, to actually be the same. But that's not the only statement that Ofqual has made. There's another statement which is actually in the same report from 2018, which uses this very complex phrase. It says something like 98% of A-level grades and 96% of GCSE grades are within plus or minus 1 grade of the definitive grade. Now, if you unravel that syntax, that says that pretty well all grades are within 1 grade of the so-called definitive grade. They're reliable to 1 grade either way. Not just that. If you go on the Ofqual website to August 2019, they posted a news item on a Sunday following an article in the Sunday Times about this. And if you read that, it says more than 1 grade could well be a legitimate reflection of a student's performance. 2019, August, more than 1 grade can be a legitimate reflection. What does that mean? And if that is true, why is there only 1 grade on the certificate? What are the other grades?
Yes.
Not just that. Joe Saxton, Dr. Joe Saxton, the former chief regulator, now the boss of UCAS, posted a podcast on YouTube dated 8th August 2022. That was the return of exams post-COVID. And she says exactly the same words. And she gives an example, just like the example I gave you, of 3 marks with the great boundary in the middle. And she says, on that basis, more than 1 grade could well be a legitimate reflection of a student's performance. So Ofqual said these things. I'm not making that up. But there's only 1 grade on the certificate. And right now, that marking error test, that review of marking, prevents the discovery of what an alternative, equally legitimate grade might be, and in particular blocks the discovery of a higher grade, which might be the senior examiner's definitive grade. And I believe that's wrong.
Goodness me. Well, Dennis, that is extraordinary, really. And of course, going back to my own experience as a teacher, I said at the beginning that exam results days are often happy days. Lots of students achieved all sorts of things, and congratulations. But for some, it's a disaster. Yeah, disaster. They'll remember 20 years, 30 years later. They didn't get into that first choice university that they'd set their heart on. They couldn't get into the 6th form to do the A-levels they wanted to do, so they did something else. Or they couldn't get onto that training course. Or for maths, increasingly in our society, if you haven't got the 4, then you can't be a teacher, you can't be a medic, you can't be and so on. There are a good list of jobs that are ruled out for you. It's an absolute disaster. So if the exam said, well, it's a sort of hypothetical grade. It could be this, it could be that, but that's not how we treat grades.
Well, you're absolutely right, John. If I could give you a specific, last Thursday, GCSE, English. English grade 3 is the same disaster as maths grade 3. Right. Now, that report I mentioned, the marking consistency metrics and update one, which had numbers in it of the reliability of grades, they give the reliability of English. The reliability of English is 61%, which means 6 out of 10 kids get the definitive grade, but about 4 out of 10 kids get a non-definitive grade. That's an important number because we also know how many kids actually got grade 3 English this year, because we know the grade distribution. It's about 170,000, I think, some number like that. Anyway, it turns out if you do the maths, 34,000 young people last Thursday were told they had grade 3 English fail when, had a senior examiner marked the script, or had they been allowed to appeal, they would all have got grade 4. 34,000, which is the size of a medium football stadium, for example. I think the City ground at Nottingham is about that size. So 34,000 kids, and they won't have appealed. And even if they were to appeal, they would still have that grade 3 confirmed because there's no marking errors. But they've been dumped into the forgotten third. They've been branded failures when they should have passed.
And as we know, it came out, one of the stories this year of the exam results was that retakes of maths and retakes of English, which are now compulsory if you carry on in education, have lamentable levels of pass. And I know exactly the reason. The students have already been knocked back once. They're deeply unmotivated. To teach a 6th form retake maths class or a 6th form retake English class is not a happy experience for either teacher or students. and attendance is poor and motivation is poor because they've already been designated a failure.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
the pass rates for retakes are terrible, and they carry out in school.
I mean, the policy of having, 1/3, the forgotten third fail is, to my mind, how on earth can we have an education system that means that if I go to my local hospital today and I go to the maternity unit, I can say that 1 in 3 of those infants in 16 years' time are going to fail GCSE English and Maths. How can we have a system that guarantees that? That's bad. But when it's the wrong kids because of the error in the grading, it's terrible.
And we as a society place so much emphasis on things like maths. You can't become a history teacher if you don't know GCSE Maths at level 4 and so on. So we are very mixed up views.
Yeah.
And we're coming to the end, and this has been fascinating discussion. And I think I know this stuff, and then listen to you, Dennis. It's absolutely remarkable. What's to be done? Final question: Where do we go? I mean, you are not a lone voice, but you are, as we said, on the margins of this. Mostly, the Pantechnicon rolls on. Grades go up, and their grades go down each year, and the governments comment on them. Is there any hope of change? 2 questions. Any hope of change?
Well, there's something that is different now is there's a new government, and that could make a real difference. The easiest thing to do is just to print on every certificate Ofqual warning: the grades on this certificate are only reliable to 1 grade either way. That costs nothing, but actually it just gives everyone the information. Don't take the grade as the sole arbiter of this kid's destiny. Don't take decisions based on grade 3 as the truth, but recognise it could have been a 4 or it might have been a 2. We just don't know. So don't take unwise, unsafe decisions. That's the simplest thing to do. We could do that literally tomorrow. There's much more that should be done. I genuinely believe the next thing should be done is that all of the information available about the challenge appeal system should explain what actually happens. Now, why is the language so complex with challenges and appeals and this, that, and the other? Why can't it just be explained fully and simply so that a parent, a student knows what's going to happen and knows the implications of that? So those are very easy things to do. Beyond that, and I really do hope the new government will take this on board, Professor Becky Francis is heading up a review of curriculum and assessment.
Yeah.
Well, the assessment system at the moment is delivering 1 grade in 4 wrong. We need to get grades we can trust, and there's umpteen ways of doing that very, very simply. And that should happen very, very soon, so that at least we can trust the grades. And, we can talk about that on another occasion. I've written a lot about this, and it is very easy to deliver a grade which is reliable and that doesn't have all the problems we've talked about. And then we're into changing the curriculum. But there are a whole host of things, John, that can be done very simply, like warning people, like giving them proper information, and like delivering reliable grades in the first place. I'm not against exams per se. I think there's too much emphasis on exams. They're not the only things. But an examination has a role done properly, but graded fairly and assessed fairly. And it's not done like that at the moment.
Dennis, thank you for that. And thank you for this interview. It's been a pleasure. And we'll speak. I have a feeling we'll speak again.
I hope so. Could I just say one thing? Firstly, John, thank you for a great conversation. But obviously, I've made a huge number of allegations in this conversation. Let me just assure you and all listeners that everything I've said is true. And there are absolute rock-solid sources on the Ofqual website, on other websites, which actually validate everything I've said. And anyone that is wanting to seek those sources, I'm very happy to drop you a note, John, if it's helpful at Teachers Talk, or anyone can contact me and I can give you the sources. Obviously, I've put my opinions on top of that, but the fundamental sources are valid.
I urge anyone, teachers, professionals, parents, to look more closely and think that maybe we don't fully understand, as I did, suspect what appeals and exams and the process really means. So Dennis Sherwood, thank you so much.
Thank you too.
And that brings to an end another episode of the Friday Morning Break here on Teachers Talk Radio. And of course, it goes without saying, congratulations to all of those students, teachers and parents who are very satisfied with the grades they achieved in the results that have just come out this summer. We wish you all the best in the future. And there's no doubting the enormous hard work you all put in. If you wish to listen to this episode again, or if you wish to find past episodes of my programme where I explore what schools are for, or all the other episodes on Teachers Talk Radio, you can find us on the Teachers Talk Radio archive. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.